welcome everybody. We'll get started. Today we're going to be talking about redeveloping brownfields for energy and the environment. I'm Carrie Martin. I am the Environmental Sustainability Planner for NJIT TAB. I come from a background of hazard mitigation, natural hazard mitigation, where I helped local governments and state governments reduce their risk to natural disasters such as flooding, wildfire, etc. I also am AICP, American Institute of Certified Planners. I went to William & Mary in Virginia, go Tribe, for public policy and environmental policy, and I did my master's in city and regional planning. And now I'm here to talk to you all about brownfields as well as the intersection between hazard mitigation and brownfields. Later, we'll be joined by Kiersten O'Leary from the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet, who also runs the Brownfield Program for Kentucky, and she'll talk about that a little bit later. So if you're not familiar with NJIT TAB, welcome. Happy to have you here. If you are familiar with us, also happy to have you here. I'm just going to briefly touch on what our program does specifically for EPA Region 4. We have served as an EPA designated technical assistance provider since 2008. We serve regions 2 and 4, and 4 includes all of the Southeast United States, including Kentucky. We're an independent resource, and we help state, territory, regional, county, tribal, and local governments, as well as nonprofits with anything they need to know, identifying, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping brownfields. And the fantastic part of this is that our assistance is completely free. We provide assistance through our Brownfields Academy, as well as our Brownfields Community Engagement and Educational Forums, and also our one-on-one technical assistance. We conduct a number of community engagement sessions as well as educational forums. I'll highlight a couple here. We have our Brownfields Basics, where essentially we go over the brownfield redevelopment process and kind of demystify what a brownfield is for folks who are not familiar with brownfields work. We have grant writing workshops to help you with your EPA multi-purpose assessment and cleanup grants applications. We hold webinars, which is what you're attending today. We also have Breaking Brownfields, where if you have a particular brownfields challenge that could benefit from advice from engineers and other private sector professionals, then we'll gather a panel of them and we can work through your challenge live. And we also have full day events called Brownfield Summits that we can also put on if you really want to dive into a specific topic. We also provide one-on-one technical assistance. So you can contact us with any specific question, reviewing your draft EPA grant applications, developing strategies, identifying brownfields, identifying funding sources. We're happy to help you with all of that. And lastly, we have our Brownfields Academy at njit.edu/tab. There we have how-to resources, success stories. You can look at all of our upcoming events that we have scheduled. You can also look at this webinar and others that are previously recorded, and look at some successful grant applications for inspiration. So before we get into our presentation in earnest, I'm going to hand the conversation over to Kiersten O'Leary for Kiersten to introduce herself as well as the Kentucky Brownfield Program. Kiersten?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Again, I'm Kiersten O'Leary. I am the Brownfield Program Coordinator for the state of Kentucky. And at the state level, we work with communities to overcome redevelopment barriers in association with brownfield sites. We provide assessment services at no cost to eligible entities. We conduct outreach and education services, very similar to the kind of events that Carrie was talking about. And then we also provide grant writing assistance and liability protections for entities that choose to redevelop brownfield sites. We see brownfields as an opportunity to get properties back into a productive reuse and also preserve our green space. And Carrie's going to talk about some of the ways that we can build back better and incorporate energy efficient features and climate mitigating features into some of our brownfield projects going forward. And I will be around obviously for the Q&A at the end of this webinar if there are any Kentucky specific questions. Again, thanks for having me, and I'm going to kick it back over to Carrie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kiersten. So you probably know what a brownfield is when you signed up for this webinar. However, I think it's good to start off on the same page. Kentucky has their own definition of a brownfield, but it's very similar to the federal one. So this is the EPA definition of a brownfield: real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So essentially, we're talking about abandoned and vacant properties that their redevelopment potential is hindered by the presence or potential presence of contamination on that site. So there are a number of negative impacts of brownfield sites that I'll touch on briefly: the environmental and economic negative impacts of these sites. So obviously you have potential harm to human health and the environment. If you have uncontrolled, unmitigated, unremediated contamination on your site, you could obviously have folks trespassing on that site or contaminants being mobilized into the environment, and the negative human health impacts of that, as well as negative environmental impacts, lowering air quality and water quality. It can also attract unwanted and illegal activities such as illegal dumping and just kind of like pop-up junkyards. If there's like continued vacancy on a site. And then some of the negative economic impacts: brownfield sites can also lower surrounding property values, reduce local work opportunities by being vacant and abandoned. There's also the possibility of lost and reduced tax revenue from not having an active site, and it also limits economic growth. What we've established is brownfield sites inherently have negative environmental and economic impacts if they're unremediated. And then we add on top of that extreme weather events and natural hazards that can further exacerbate those issues. And so while contamination mobilization is, generally an issue on brownfield sites, this can be exacerbated specifically by floodwaters. Unremediated brownfield sites are susceptible to increased and repeated damage from extreme events that can mobilize contaminants and also compromise structures. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see one of my colleagues out in the field with an underground storage tank that has been damaged by an extreme event. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an image from Hurricane Harvey in Houston. There were a number of unremediated brownfield sites in Houston. And during the hurricane, the floodwaters could have potentially picked up those contaminants and mobilized them to other locations, further perpetuating the negative human health and environmental effects of those contaminants. So what do we do about this? What we can do is we can move towards a model of resilience and leverage the redevelopment of brownfields to build resilience. So here I have the EPA definition, which is a capability to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover well from significant multi-hazard threats with minimum damage to social well-being, the economy, and the environment. So these are just generic images, but I think a good generic example of how you can build resilience. So let's say you have a structure that's continually damaged by floodwaters. You wouldn't necessarily want to rebuild that structure the same way it was before, because it could be that during the next storm, the same damage occurs. And so you want to think about how you can rebuild in a way that's safer. And so one potential option is to elevate that structure. You can also, move the structure to higher ground. Or you could implement some localized flood control projects as well, which we'll talk a little bit about more later. But essentially, the resilience model is one in which we're not building back to the same standard, but rather building back to a higher standard in order to minimize further damage. Again, as I mentioned, we can build resilience through brownfield redevelopment. Obviously, brownfield redevelopment in general will have positive environmental impacts by obviously removing any contaminants and pollution that may be on site, improving air and water quality as well as natural habitats by, removing the contaminants that were degrading the air and water quality, as well as habitat. And there are ways to, while you redevelop things, spark positive environmental change in your community. So the images you'll see on this screen are just taken from Google Street View, but it's an example in Covington, Kentucky. So this is Orchard Street, and there was a junkyard that was on Orchard Street that was a brownfield site that was redeveloped. And that redevelopment, it was a junkyard and there was dumping there, and they converted it into parking. But even though that was just one brownfield site that was redeveloped into something small like a parking lot, it really sparked the redevelopment of the entire neighborhood. So on the top, you'll see these row houses, or rather these like shotgun kind of homes. And these are historic structures that were revitalized during this redevelopment effort as a way to uplift the community and bring it more economic value. And the specific environmental benefits you'll see on the bottom, one is Orchard Park, a neighborhood park that used to hold the Orchard Park Farm Project. And similarly, there's a nearby community garden, which you'll see in the bottom right hand of your screen. Community gardens are a great way to not only bring vegetation and greenery and open space to your community, but also to provide a space to build relationships with other people, build community, grow food, to feed yourselves, your families, and your neighbors, and just perpetuate general like health and well-being in your community. Further economic impacts of brownfield site redevelopment, it's job creation in general, and it's diversification of the economic base. On the bottom hand of your screen, you'll see Doodle's Breakfast and Lunch, which is in Lexington. So this used to be a gas station and a liquor store in Lexington, and it was redeveloped into a very quaint, very cute breakfast and lunch spot that also pays homage to the, mid 20th century gas station that it used to be. So I want to further talk about resilience and different ways that you can, as Kiersten said, build back better from natural disasters and ways that you can integrate that into brownfield redevelopment. So first, I wanted to start with a discussion of distributed energy as well as microgrids. So distributed energy are technologies that generate electricity at or where it might be used. It can power just one property, or it can be part of a microgrid. So if you break it down, like it's just a small electric grid. But more technically, it's an integrated system of energy consumers, such as like homes or businesses or industrial properties, and distributed energy technologies that can operate in conjunction with or even autonomously of a utility grid. And because microgrids can build into the utility grid, like during blue sky times, and supplement that energy, but it can also operate alone during a power outage. This means that if you have a microgrid, it can potentially make your power grid more resilient and help you recover quicker from disasters. If you have that separate form of energy that you can use to power your home or business, or other like small area during disaster. Probably when you're thinking of backup power, you're thinking about emergency backup generators, but there are other forms of distributed energy. These can include, and this is not a comprehensive list, but it's just a short list, natural gas-fired fuel cells, combined heat and power systems, as well as solar panels. And I would say that you should consider using renewable energy for your microgrid on a brownfield site. Some benefits can include energy generation being sited on contaminated or formerly contaminated lands rather than on open space. So if you are interested in fortifying your electric grid with a microgrid, rather than siting it in an open field, if you have it on a brownfield site, you can conserve that open space and conserve potential agricultural land by putting it on a place that's already been developed. Brownfield sites can also have advantageous locations. They can be along rail lines or waterways. They can be in downtown areas. And because of that, they have potential existing infrastructure that you can leverage to hook in a microgrid into your greater utility grid with probably greater ease than if you were developing something from scratch. And it also gives you the possibility of developing economic activity on properties that lack other reuse options. For example, it could be the case that you're in like a federally defined floodplain, and as a result, your redevelopment options are limited, but you do want to generate revenue on that land. And so what you can do is that you can, elevate all of the electrical equipment outside of the floodplain, but also have a small solar array that could power nearby infrastructure. This is in keeping with resilience because it gives you that possibility for backup power, but it also puts in a productive economic use for property without, like within a floodplain, without something that's going to bring people into harm's way, such as like a home or a business. So this is just a brief summary of some benefits of renewable energy on brownfield sites. This information was collected by an initiative from the EPA called Repowering America's Land, which specifically encourages the siting of renewable energy on brownfield sites, abandoned mines, as well as other contaminated or potentially contaminated lands. Some of the economic benefits of this include job creation. EPA conducted a study and they found that 86 renewable energy projects on brownfields reported job creation. There's just an excerpt here from one project. Over its 20-year lifespan, it's expected to generate approximately 1,300 full-time jobs. or full-time equivalent employee years rather. Revenue generation, again, as I said before, you could have a plot of land that's very difficult to site anything due to its risk of natural disaster. But you can still generate revenue through citing energy generation on there. This can come in the form of pilots or payment in lieu of taxes, as well as lease payments, as you can see in this example here, and energy cost savings as well. So when you're using renewable energy to supplant your grid, it can also reduce your electric bill as well as the electric bills for any customers that you may have. And all of the links here will go to EPA's Repowering America's initiative, their benefits matrix, where they, again, have collected information from people who have, or communities who have implemented this before, and then reported on the economic, social, and environmental benefits of these programs. So if you're looking for some federal resources, if you want to learn more, as well as if you want technical assistance and or financial assistance, I would encourage you again to go to the Repowering America's Land Initiative. The screenshot you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen is the process checklist for renewable energy siting on brownfields. So this is a multi-page PDF that you can download that will take you through the assessment of site conditions, integrating design, implementing cleanup, and operating and maintaining renewable energy on a brownfield site, and walk you through from a federal level everything that you need to know in order to get that development underway. What you'll see on the top left-hand side of your screen is the Green Bank for Rural America. So this is part of Appalachian Community Capital. It was just launched at the end of last year. And so it's still getting underway, but they are building out a technical assistance hub of tools, information, and expert guidance related to distributed energy generation and storage. They have some project examples up on their website, including 2 Kentucky examples, and they'll be continually adding additional resources to this hub to help you out. And again, this is all targeted towards rural America and specifically Appalachia, if that applies to your community. And then you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, the Thriving Communities Grant Makers for EPA Region 4, which is a grant-making program specifically for environmental justice communities and community-based organizations. In Region 4, they provide non-competitive grants to community-based organizations that want to improve the environmental conditions in their area. And so you can go to their website to learn more, including whether you're community-based organization or a community-based organization in your region or like local area would be eligible to apply for one of these non-competitive grants. Oh, and Vince added in the chat that EPA has a Repowering America representative for each EPA region. This is on the Repowering website. Thank you, Vince. So Region 4 has their own representative who can assist you if you have any questions. So in addition to distributed energy and obviously when you have natural disasters, power outages are a large concern, but also if you have flood issues, the flooding itself is a concern as well. So what you'll see here is an image created by the EPA to illustrate what a flooding issue on a brownfield site may look like. So in this example, we have a corner gas station that has been abandoned and may have contamination on it. you can see that on the left. In the middle, you can see the roadway is flooded because of the storm event, and there is poor drainage for stormwater management. You can see that the culvert, if you can imagine one, there isn't built for this storm, or there's something going on that it's not able to properly manage all of this precipitation. So what would we do in this situation? So what we can do is that we can remove and reduce contaminants to clean the site. I'm not of the EPA, but I interpret EPA guidance to be that the paramount objective of redevelopment of brownfield sites is to improve human health and safety and remove contaminants as best as possible, as well as to minimize or mitigate any potential mobilization of those contaminants. So obviously every redevelopment needs to start with removing as much contamination as possible. And also in that regard, we want to make sure that we're not mobilizing contaminants with floodwaters, which I spoke about in the beginning of this webinar. And so the interventions that you might want to consider would manage stormwater offsite. So it wouldn't go into that potentially contaminated land and then move contaminants around. So you see we've cleaned up the gas station and we've put in a corner store and a little ice cream shop. There's also, now you can see there's vegetation or green infrastructure offsite in the roadway, which I'll speak about a little bit in a minute. And you can also add pervious surfaces, which I'll also speak about in a minute. These are different natural ways, nature-based solutions to control stormwater and manage it offsite so it's not interacting with that closed gas station. And then obviously a traditional solution would just be to improve the drainage capacity of your stormwater system. So I will speak briefly about permeable surfaces. So permeable pavement or pervious pavement has openings in it, which would allow water to soak into the soil. So you'll see some images down on the bottom in parking lots and along streets. Instead of just having concrete or asphalt or macadam, you can use more permeable surfaces in order for the precipitation to soak in and potential floodwaters to soak into the soil. Bioswales are another thing that you can implement, and like vegetated swales in parking lots. Again, it can be vegetated, mulched, and used to retain and treat stormwater on site. And again, you would want to implement these in the area around, in non-contaminated areas around where a brownfield site might be, in order to manage and store stormwater so it doesn't interact with any potential contaminants. So if you're interested in opportunities to fund things like this, they're not open at the moment. They generally open in the fall, but EPA has their brownfield grants. They have multi-purpose assessment revolving loan fund and cleanup grants. This was based off of last year's numbers. So last year they had assessment revolving loan fund and cleanup grants that were available. Assessment, obviously you can use that for planning activities and community outreach. Revolving loan fund, you can use that to capitalize loans for brownfield cleanup. And then cleanup grants, you can obviously use that to remove any potential contamination from your site. If you're interested in workforce development, I also wanted to include 2 resources in addition to the assessment multipurpose RLF and cleanup grants. There are also job training grants that open sooner than this fall. I believe they open around the summer. And there's a number of resources on EPA's website. If your community has an institute of higher education or a nonprofit that conducts workforce development programs, and you're interested in, you know, training up a workforce in like OSHA and, you know, getting them prepared for jobs related to brownfield redevelopment, you can use this website. As well, I'll go back to the Green Bank for Rural America. They're developing a workforce development technical assistance hub. And that's not available at the moment, but again, they're adding additional resources because they just opened this last year. Some considerations for your brownfield site. If your community is seeing increasing storm events, you might want to consider identifying and prioritizing brownfield sites for redevelopment in order to, again, mitigate any potential contaminant mobilization due to storms. And when prioritizing your sites, you may want to consider your site's vulnerability to flooding. Also, if you're looking into integrating anything like a microgrid or any of the green infrastructure solutions or any of the other solutions that I talked about today, I would encourage you to collaborate with the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet to determine what solutions would be appropriate for your site. Okay, before we go to the Q&A, I'll kick it back over to Kiersten if you have anything else to add.
The only other thing that I can think of is just, popping in addition to your funding slide where, obviously the EPA has elevated levels of brownfield funding right now through the infrastructure law that was passed. And we're anticipating that this is the last year of that infrastructure funding. But we also at the state have a revolving loan fund called the Cleaner Commonwealth Fund. And so that will continue on depending on how much, supplemental funding that we get for that in the future. We have, and Fatima just put a link in the chat, but we have, those are eligible, or you can use that, eligible entities can use that to clean up brownfield sites, just the remediation piece, but all the information for that's on our website, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Kiersten. If you have any questions or comments for us, please feel free to use the chat feature or feel free to use the Q&A feature.
Hey, and Kiersten, you had mentioned before when we had been discussing earlier about the GIS tool that y'all had available.
Oh yeah, I meant to send the link for that. If you look up Kentucky Brownfield Program Hub, I can find it and put it in the chat really quick, but we have a resource. It's kind of geared toward beginners for brownfields, just a couple of like one-pagers about assessment and liability protections and all of our services here at the state level. And then additionally, kind of where funding has gone in the past several years. And we also, a lot of times people ask us about an inventory, which it's impossible, anybody that works in brownfields knows that it's impossible to keep a revolving open inventory of available brownfield sites, but we do have records of everything that we've ever performed assessment work on, that people can take a look at and see where those assessment services have happened. We use it internally to look at, hey, where do assessments possibly need to be done at? But yeah, let me find that real quick and I'll pop it in the chat.
That's amazing. Yeah, a lot of the smaller communities that reach out to you, that's one of the very first things that they're looking for is some kind of direction on where to get started and what's already available to look at in terms of brownfields. So thanks, that's super helpful.
Yeah, of course.
Kiersten, do you have any success stories of, open space or anything that you'd like to talk about?
We have definitely, I've only been with the program, I guess it's around 3 years now. So brownfield redevelopment doesn't happen overnight. So I haven't been around to see something completely from start to finish, but there are several that we've worked on and performed assessments on that we've seen go on to get significant amounts of funding through EPA, including an old rail yard in Irvine, Kentucky. And I know that they actually just got awarded one of the $5 million cleanup grants. So they're bound to be incorporating some climate mitigation into that. And then we also have Hazelwood Hospital is a big redevelopment in Maysville, Kentucky, that I've gotten to follow along with. I will plug that we usually host a Brownfield boot camp in the spring. And if anyone is interested in joining our newsletter that we have just from the state, feel free to send me an email, and I will get you added to that. That way, if there's any upcoming events that you would like to see, I know NJIT does a great job of incorporating those events into their newsletter as well. But if you ever need more information or want to be on those, I'm happy to add you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kiersten. Yeah, and that's an excellent point about getting awarded funds and integrating some things like green infrastructure and renewable energy and energy efficiency. If folks on the line are interested in applying for EPA multi-purpose assessment cleanup grants, there are, questions about in the application about, how are you going to encourage energy efficiency? How are you going to, try to build resilience into your redevelopment plan? And so you can use what we've talked about here or any of the resources that I shared in order to learn more information about how you could integrate that into your application if you want to apply for those grants this coming fall. And we do have a question in the chat. And I'll start out, and then Kiersten, if you want to jump in, please feel free to do so. Have you seen resilient infrastructure associated with ecotourism? And if so, what does it look like? I would probably discuss greenways. So if you're not familiar with greenways, generally, if you have like an old abandoned rail network, or other like linear pathway that abuts like abandoned vacant properties, you can generally convert those into what are called greenways, where you encourage like regional walking and biking and other like recreational activities. And there you can also integrate, if it's on a river or other body of water, you can integrate like boat launches and encourage things like canoeing, kayaking. An example that I think is really awesome is the Chattahoochee Riverlands in the metropolitan Atlanta area in Georgia, where Trust for Public Lands, as well as the city of Atlanta and other entities are working on, taking a lot of what was an industrial area on the Chattahoochee River and converting it into like this linear greenway and creating a lot of kayak launches to encourage folks to walk, bike, and paddle along the river.
I can't think of anything specifically other than to say that I know that the Kentucky Steam, the rail yard in Irvine, they're looking at incorporating some of those things. They have a couple of active locomotives that they're going to be able to take people, to a couple counties away and then be able to, do some ecotourism in association with that as well.
Great. And we're very fortunate in March. NJIT TAB is going to have a webinar specifically on brownfields to greenways. And we're going to hear from two projects, one, the Chattahoochee Riverlands that I mentioned before, and then up here in New Jersey, they're converting an area, like a former industrial area into a greenway to connect Jersey City, New Jersey to Newark, New Jersey. So stay tuned for that in March. Okay, and we also have a comment in the chat that the next National Brownfields Conference is in Chicago from August 5th to the 8th in 2025. And if you go to gobrownfields.org, you can find more information on that. Yeah, so if there are no additional questions, I'll wait like just a couple more minutes. And then we can kind of discuss, you know, if folks want to hop off early because they need to get to something, you're welcome to, and thank you for joining us. But also we're going to stay on a little bit longer and talk about some upcoming events that we have virtual, that if folks are interested in joining, they can do so. And you can see our information here, and we have that in the chat as well. If you have questions for me, you can email us at tab@njit.edu, or go to our website, LinkedIn, etc. And we put Kiersten's email on there as well.
Also, in 2025, we're starting our new type of session called Tab Talks. We're excited to share that will, sorry, my bad. This will consist of conversations among us and special collaborators. While we're sure you're all excited to learn more about brownfield redevelopment, we're also looking to delve deeper into more of the various areas with which our work intersects, hopefully breaking down some of the silos of real projects to make it easier for those pursuing remediation and redevelopment. We've got a great slate of talks, including understanding your Phase 1 ESA reports, highlighting nonprofits, brownfields on Main Street, history of brownfields, exploring the green economy and the new jobs it creates, and more. Stay tuned for dates and times via our email list or LinkedIn. If you're interested in joining the conversation, let us know. We'd love to have you available. If you have an expertise that you'd love to share, we'd love to highlight you. Or if you just want to attend, feel free to touch base with us for any future events. All right. You all have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.